As a part of doing the last video on evolution and natural selection, I read up on it just a little bit to remind myself what it was all about, because of course it's been a long time since I was in school and learned about these kinds of things. And an interesting thing happened as a part of doing that. I came across old information I had on morphogenetic fields and morphic resonance, and I hadn't thought about that concept in a long time either. Or I guess I always had that concept in mind. It's just I sort of removed it from the context that Rupert Sheldrake put it in. Because at its core, that theory is just describing the communication system that exists on planet Earth between the environment and living sentient creatures. In other words, at a certain point, the scientific terms become irrelevant as the communication system comes online in your own mind and being, to the point where it becomes this lived experience that you don't need a textbook to regurgitate back to you. And indeed, the textbook doesn't quite have it in the way that you experience it. I'm paraphrasing here, so bear with me on that front if you're an expert on this subject matter. But morphic resonance is just another way of explaining the concept that memory is a non-local field of information that exists beyond the scale of any individual mind that is connected into it. Meaning, as far as sentient creatures go, the scale of brain size is related to the amount of storage capacity that the brain actually has. You could compare this to computers and the hard drive, the amount of storage that a computer has. And it's kind of funny when you look at the market for computers now, the price is directly correlated to the amount of storage capacity that the computer has. The cheapest of all computers will have a very limited amount of storage space, and then the most expensive computers will have a significant amount of storage space, more than you probably will ever need. When you have the storage capacity to run all kinds of different programs, well, that is going to increase what you can do with the computer itself. And it's the same with the brain. The larger it is, the more hard drive it has, the more abilities that it has, the more processes it could run simultaneously. And we point at that and say it's intelligence. But we get confused thinking that intelligence, or the capacity to remember information, to record and retrieve information, means smart, wise. Think of any synonym along those lines. We confuse that ability with actually being intelligent because we call it intelligence. That's what school is, right? It's memory and regurgitation. That cycle is rewarded in our school systems across the world. But that doesn't have anything to do with true wisdom or true intelligence. And that's part of the problem on this planet currently, is that the loop of regurgitating stored information has spiraled out of control into the hubris that is the human race thinking it knows everything, thinking that it can chart its own course outside of the confines of what the creation laid down in front of it. And I say human race as if it's us doing that, but obviously there is something that is beyond us pulling those strings and herding us in that direction. However, the point remains, that is what is being used in our minds to spearhead that effort. In other words, the question is, if brain size or storage space determined intelligence, how is it possible that a butterfly or any other tiny-brained creature is capable of remembering how to do all of the things that it does? How is it capable of functioning in the way that it does? How do they know the path to take to go from one part of the world to another part of the world? Remember, they don't have the storage capacity that a human being does or any other similar creature with a brain our size does. It can't store the information anywhere. And yet it is intelligent. It has wisdom. It knows what it's supposed to do. And this is where morphic resonance comes into play. It's the idea of a non-local field of stored memories. Another way to put it in occult terms would be nature's egregore, nature's thought form. The non-local field of information that stores memories for all of the creations that are connected into it. And every time I say connected into it, I'm saying intuit at the same time, and it's kind of what they're doing. That's what you're describing, intuition. Intuition is true intelligence. Intuition is wisdom, because that is coming from a place that is connected into that which created us. And that is where all wisdom flows from, because we don't know anything outside of that. But anyway, this is where the idea of the 100th monkey comes from, and I'm sure everyone listening to this has heard that concept before as well. You could view it in terms of, say, a certain species of mice who are running a maze in a laboratory somewhere, and this species learns how to run the maze so precisely after doing it so many times, it becomes a learned habit. And in theory then, that memory is stored in the morphogenetic field for that species of mice, to the point where if you took a member of that species in a place across the world that had never come into contact with the other mice who you were originally running through the maze, in theory, they would be able to access that information and run the maze no problem without you ever having to teach them how to do it. They would have an intuition for how to complete the maze because beings that they are connected to had done it before, and that information field is stored collectively, non-locally, outside of the mind. And this just makes sense intuitively because we have all of this evidence of our organs having their own electromagnetic fields that extend outside of the body. We're shown how the Earth's electromagnetic fields, the Van Allen radiation belts, everything that is coalescing together to form the energetic aspect of the Earth extends out from the Earth well into space. There are all of these examples of fields penetrating well beyond where they originate. So it only makes sense then, logically, that your mind would also extend out from the brain. And the second mind, that is the liver and the intestines and the heart and the lungs, that whole internal organ area in your chest and stomach. All of that is extending out from the body itself. But in particular, the mind is doing the same thing. And that is where your storage device, called the brain, is sending information to the human being's morphogenetic field. And that information can be accessed by other human beings. And this is where you get the idea of the 100th monkey. Again, a similar example to those mice. In the case of the monkeys, it's this idea of, well, this one group of monkeys were messing around and they figured this thing out to the point where it became a habit, and then inexplicably you have this tipping point where all of a sudden monkeys across the world are doing this same habit even though they didn't learn it themselves. It was transmitted to them, in other words. And at the beginning, I said that morphic resonance was just describing the communication system that exists on this planet. And hopefully you can see why I said that now. Because we're sending out this information, and that is where the idea of telepathy comes from. If the field of the mind is extending out from the body, then it just, again, makes intuitive sense that you would be able to transmit something to another mind that is likewise receiving information in the same way that it is sending it out. And the super smart human beings are finally understanding via research like this and just our own intuition on the matter. Oh, hey, these animals are communicating in a telepathic way. They're communicating in a way that isn't using language like we use it. Somehow they're exchanging information with each other. And you can see through this process how you might be able to send an image out of your mind and into anyone who would receive its mind. But it's not telepathy in the sense that it's portrayed in most media, which is, I'm going to read your thoughts, or I'm going to control your mind and make you do something. Now, sure, that's where the more detached permutations of this knowledge have been abused by those who have their own agenda with it. And we see this via the media, where you can put images into someone's mind in an attempt to sway them into engaging in activities or whatever the case is that are against their best interests, that serve an agenda beyond their own. Controlling their mind, for lack of a better term. I mean, that's what a television is. That's what this computer screen is. It's the idea of telepathy solidified into physical matter. It's just at first it was going through a cord, traveling through materials that had been constructed in this way. And now we've reached the point where it's actually in the air in the same way. That's what all of these Wi-Fi fields are. They are etheric in that way. The Ethernet, they told you, with the naming of it. And this is the real reason why those electromagnetic fields and those Wi-Fi fields are not conducive to us being who we are supposed to be, because that is pollution in the morphogenetic field of the human race. That's pollution in our morphic resonance. We are learning all of these habits in natural selection terms that are increasingly geared towards surviving in a digital world. And as that habit becomes more learned and more learned, we see the behavior manifesting out of human beings in physical reality. And these are all the habits that I don't need to point out to you. You've all seen them. You see the people glued to their computer phones. I don't need to tell you about all of that stuff now. You've seen it. But as the system itself reinforces those habits, it becomes what we intuit as necessary for survival. I need to be plugged into this world. I need to select habits in my own life that make me a part of the connected digital world, or I will not survive, or I will not be able to feed my family. My kids' kids will not have a place in the world. And that's the driving force in our evolution right now. At its core, it's the solidification of telepathy, this natural ability that we all have to communicate without language. And most likely, this is how human beings used to be. We were probably much more like the ants or the bees or the butterflies or whatever sentient creature you want to think of along these lines, where we didn't have a lot of storage space. Our brains were much smaller, but we were connected to the environment, to creation, in the way that we were designed to be connected to it. And so we would have so much more intuition and wisdom about our place in the world, and our actions would reflect that place in the world. Our societies would reflect that connection. and they would look so much different to what they look like now. This is probably due to the influence of media like the X-Men or things along those lines, but telepathy has been turned into something where it's viewed as a kind of superpower. Like you need to do something special or be born a certain way to have this ability that other people don't have. And it's like, no, you guys don't understand. This is the default setting of human beings, like it is every other creature. As a sentient being in this place, we have the ability to communicate with nature and each other intuitively. That's the design. It's not something special that is beyond anyone's reach. Although it is something that will be blocked for a lot of people because you can't necessarily be trusted with that kind of ability in your state of being as it exists. So abilities like that are kind of for your own safety and everyone else around you, stifled by that which created you. It's kind of like, no, we're not going to let you mess around with anything like that. You're in no state to do that. And indeed, that's where a lot of the problems come into play, because it's viewed as this thing that is a power, and then you have all of these people selling you ideas about how you achieve power like that. And then that leads you down all of these paths that detaches you further from your default states. I've been talking about computers a lot in this one, and it's kind of like that. You're trying to reboot your system, remove all the malware in your stream of consciousness, all those cycles of thoughts that repeat over and over again, remove that, reboot the system so it's just that little blinking square on the dark screen, and then you start again. And you're like, oh, this is how it works. This is how my body is supposed to function. This is how I'm supposed to feel on a day-to-day basis. This is how life is supposed to be. I see. When you experience this kind of thing, there is no way not to be in complete awe of life. It's unbelievable. I mean, it's unreal what is happening out there. And you get so detached from it that you just can't believe it. Is this happening? Is this real life? Is this actually going on? And you're just in awe of how lucky you are to just experience this. It's magnificent. And I can already hear all of the minds that are turning and immediately rejecting what I said there, thinking to themselves, oh, well, what about this? What about this suffering I see over here? What about that? How magnificent is that, my friend? And it's like, look, man, I get it. But let's get into that, because it's related to morphic resonance and morphogenetic fields. I was thinking about this, God or the creator, whatever you want to say. I see how I clench up and sort of tighten up when I say God and creator, because I know you're all going to react to that in different ways. So I don't even want to use those words. I want to put a word in there for whatever created me and the being that is speaking through this recording device right now. Whatever created that, that's what I'm referring to. Forget about this fake language they have us all speaking and how charged all of the words are. But anyways, many years ago, I was watching this near-death experience account from, I can't remember who it was now. I can see the guy's face in my mind's eye, but I can't remember what his name was. And it's buried somewhere in my files, and I don't have time to look for it right now. But I remember the conversation, and he was talking about how he became an atheist in his life and was just completely on the wrong path. In every way you can be on the wrong path here. use your imagination, drugs, etc. And he has this experience where he is in the hospital dying. And he comes back with this experience of what religion would refer to as hell. And this scared him straight, as it were. He turned his life around as soon as he woke up and realized he was going to live. But the most interesting part of the whole story that he was telling was this little tidbit of information he gave where he said that he had this friend that he had known all his life, basically. And it was this lady who I think was older than him. And she later told him, when he sort of shifted his perspective and started to get involved in preaching Christianity, he reconnected with this woman who told him that she had been praying for him his whole life, essentially. And she saw him going down the wrong path, but she said, I just kept praying for you. I never stopped. Now, if you think about what I've been going into thus far, my apologies for using the word thus there. That's twice in 2 videos. It won't happen again, I promise. That is morphic resonance. That is the morphogenetic field that is religion, whatever kind you're referring to. It's non-local. It's a stored habit that is a thought form in and of itself at this point. Meaning, as a thought experiment, let's just assume the biblical account of what is going on in this world is actually true. And there is this entity referred to as Satan in control of this world, and that which created us, God, sent itself into this place and provided us with the protection from that which is in control here if we allow it to protect us. If we do what we need to do to deserve that protection, in other words. If you assume that's true for the sake of this thought experiment, the example that that guy gave really shows the power of the whole thing, right? Someone not even connected to him physically was able to pray for him throughout his whole life, even as he completely deviated from anything that could be considered in line with what he was supposed to be doing. The power of that intention coming from the person who was praying for him and seeking to protect him in that way was so great that it was able to do so in spite of everything that was going on, in spite of the decisions that he was making for himself. Intuitively, at least at first, you would think, well, surely he will be judged based on his own actions. And this is an example of it being like, no, I care about you so much that I'll even let one of my other creations who cares about you protect you from yourself. Meanwhile, you might even be on the internet saying how God is evil. This world is evil. Everything about it is terrible. You're spreading all of this negative, toxic energy to everyone around you in your life, proclaiming how smart you are. You've figured it all out. You're a follower of science. You're on the cutting edge. Breaking every one of the alleged rules that are in place to protect everyone from the influence of that which is in control here, especially once you start breaking the rules. That's how powerful it is, the protection that was given. In other words, like morphogenetic fields and morphic resonance, you can have individual bloodlines, genetically speaking, that have these attachments to certain things that are cycles of misery because there's no protection involved. Everyone is detached from the way that they are designed to be, and they're feeding into this morphic resonance, this habitual morphogenetic field of how that family behaves. Potentially involved in all kinds of occult sorcery and witchcraft and New Age practices that invite certain entities into the bloodline, and they control that bloodline throughout the generations. And people are trapped in this cycle of misery and suffering. And that is the kind of mentality that looks around in this world and says, oh my gosh, how could you ever have awe of this world, of this creation? It's miserable. Put another way, these entities, these forces, principalities get into your morphic genetic field. They get into the morphic resonance that's taking place in your mind and extending out. And you have no idea that that is going on, that that is the source for why nothing seems to ever go right for you. If I have an open mind, I have to consider the same thing as it relates to my own life. I grew up in organized religion, not by my choice, obviously, by my parents' choice. And I quickly removed that from my life as soon as I was given the opportunity. And as soon as I removed it from my life, I began the path of debauchery, right? I started drinking and smoking, and I was consumed by partying, watching media, watching sports, going to school, having fun, quote unquote, doing all of the things that you're supposed to do that is viewed as normal. And yet, through that process, I would have arrogantly told anyone who would listen how fine my life was without God. I don't need any of that. I'm fine. Look, nothing bad is happening. But you see how arrogant that is, because I have no idea who in my own life, friends, family, etc., might have been praying for me to protect me from myself while all of that was going on. If I'm honest, I have to at least pose that question to myself. Is that why nothing truly horrible ever happened to you during that period in time? And it's so wild if that is true. I mean, I have no idea if it is. Again, this is just a thought experiment. But if something like that were true, there's a point in my life where I'm watching documentaries about how ridiculous God is, the idea of it, and I'm agreeing with the words on the screen. Yes, that's true. And I'm spreading that idea to other people. I mean, I wasn't some kind of an evangelist for it, but like, if someone asked me about it, I would tell them how I felt. So I'm spreading ideas that are potentially influencing people away from things that they shouldn't be influenced away from. And yet at the same time, I'm not being punished for that because something else is protecting me, even though I didn't deserve it. Now, of course, like anything else in this world, that which is in control of it has corrupted what I'm talking about here. But that doesn't matter. Your intent is the only thing that matters. And that which created you sees your intent. Are the religions, for the most part, corrupt and totally detached from the original message that came through them? Yes, of course. But it's like going into a McDonald's, ordering a hamburger, testing the ingredients in it and saying, oh my gosh, hamburgers are evil. It's like, no. If you actually made a hamburger yourself, say you raised a cow, gave it a great life, and it died on its own. It just grew old or whatever the case was, and you harvest the meat from this cow who had this amazing life filled with this great energy, and you bake your own bread, you take tomatoes from your own tomato plants, lettuce from your own lettuce plants, pickles from cucumbers that you picked yourself, that you grew. You put all those ingredients together, you call it a hamburger too, and you serve it to somebody. They take one bite and they say, oh my gosh, that's the best thing that I've ever tasted in my life. And then you test the ingredients and you're like, this is the most healthy creation imaginable. That is what religion is in comparison to what it has been turned into. But you see, as a result of what it has been turned into, people just say, God is evil. God isn't real. God's a joke. I don't need God in my life if that's what it is. And it's like, no. You're just eating the McDonald's hamburger version as opposed to the real thing that is the man they call Jesus and what it came here to tell you and do for you. You see, that's the difference. And so it doesn't matter whether you go through the actual McDonald's version of it, the McChurches, as it were, if your intent is a connection with your Creator, with God, it's going to look past the fact that you are surrounded by something that the entity in control of this world created and is trying to use to lead you astray. If that is the intention of every person that came together on a certain day to express that intuitive gratitude for being granted the privilege of being alive and healthy, if people came together with that as the basis for it, and it was inside of a church, you would have the same experience that people coming together with that same intention would have outside of a church. And yet the people outside of the church somehow think that they've stumbled upon something that is different or better because they've cut the church part out, that mind control part out that is religion, right? But you have to see how it's the same fundamentally, no matter what perspective you're coming at it from. The core truth is the same. Disparaging someone who is religious along these lines is counterproductive if their intent is what I am referring to here. Now, of course, it's like anything else. If you went through the drive-thru of McDonald's and interviewed the people getting food there, most of them would have no idea what's going on in this world, or else they wouldn't be in that drive-thru line, right? And it's the same thing at a lot of these churches. It's just the state of this place. You can't blame people for being consumed by it. I was consumed by it. Why would I blame someone else? Just because of where I'm at now with it. Why would I spread some kind of toxic, hateful vibe their way, knowing that it's extending out of my body every time I'm in public and around these people? Why would I do it online either? That doesn't make any sense. What, because I'm anonymous? Because no one will ever know it's me? I'm going to spread this hateful trolling at someone? And trust me, I understand that trolling can be fun and some people deserve it from time to time, but still, you're not doing anyone any favors by doing that. Or at the very least, you're hiding behind the idea that it needed to happen. Someone had to do it. Someone had to say it, and hiding behind that to excuse yourself from the responsibility of acting how you were designed to act, how you know deep down in your heart that you're supposed to be acting to everyone that you see and come into contact with. Even if it's through the crystallized form of telepathy known as the computer screen. But along those lines, you can see the flip side of what I was going into earlier, where someone on the outside could be a very religious family that goes to church every week. And on the surface, they're doing everything that they're supposed to do. But yet, for whatever reason, something tragic happens in their life or something bad happens to one of their children. They get some kind of serious disease. And the person on the outside looking in says, well, look, see, where was God protecting their child if God's real? Why would it let that happen? And it's like, well, there's just so much more involved in it than just that. I mean, look at all the moving parts that are going on here. And for you to judge that situation just shows you how insane you are, right? You're not even close to being able to understand why things happen, okay? You're not even qualified in the slightest to have an opinion on it, let alone state with certainty what it is, why it's happening. And invariably, you will be humbled at some point in your life if that is how you are behaving. Because that is the default setting of a human being, of a sentient human in this place. The default setting, whether you like it or not, is humble servant of that which created you. That's it. That's the truth that you've all been searching for. And it's anticlimactic, right? Because like I was going into about the X-Men and superpowers and manifesting your own reality, creating everything you ever dreamed of. Nope, sorry, that's not what you're supposed to be. And it's very boring, right? It's not exciting like an Avengers movie. Nope, just super boring. You're a humble servant, and that's what you're supposed to be. Sorry. That's it. And I know people don't want to hear that. And the rebels among us, and I have a little bit of that in myself too, so I understand, will be like, well, I'm not going to be anybody's servant. I'm no one's slave. I'm my own master. And I'm not going to go for any of these belief systems, right? Because you could go with the idea of egregores and thought forms and morphic resonance and say, well, if I allow myself to be bonded, magnetically speaking, to this one thought form, well, then that opens me up to the demonic influence. It's like I've agreed to the rules of the game at that point, and then these things or the other things can happen. I'm not going to go with any of that. I'm starting my own independent idea. I'm my own master. And I can understand that reaction to a certain extent until you sit with it for a second and think, wait, hold on a second. How exactly would I describe what Aleister Crowley did when he created his own form of magic with a K? He had his own language, his own belief system, tarot card decks. He created all that himself and was his own master. Oh, crap. I would be doing the exact same thing. So you see, it's like, regardless of what your intent is in that scenario, you are going down the path that leads to oblivion. How did Aleister Crowley die? Penniless, addicted to drugs. Totally destitute in all ways that a person can be destitute. And there are 1,000 different versions of that cult being created in real time today. Everyone has their own spin on it. So while you might not want to be a slave, as it were, and I understand that mentality, if you go your own way in the fashion that I just described, well, you're not doing anything different than any other self-proclaimed occult sorcerer did in all of recorded history. The boring truth is that, no, you're a humble servant of God that is not designed to do anything other than that which you were created to be able to do. And when you reboot the system, as it were, and you see clearly for the first time what that actually is, outside of the influence of everything that's going on here, you have that aha moment and think to yourself, oh yeah, there is no reason for anything else because this is incredible. I've been given so much already. There's nothing for me to want. There's no power for me to seek outside of this, because this is, what more could I ask for? But not many people in this world are going to like that answer because, well, there's no power there to do anything. It's powerless in terms of the material world. You can't con anyone with that mentality. You can't steal their pension with that mentality. You can't cast a spell on somebody to try to make them love you, try to force them to be your partner. You can't do anything like that with that mentality, which is why it has to be the truth, you see. Because the true creator would never do that to you. To the point where, hypothetically, it would let someone else protect you from yourself just by believing in it and its love for you and everyone else. That's pretty cool, man. You got to admit, that's pretty cool. At least I think so. And when you have that realization, someone comes to you and says, oh my gosh, we have a fiat currency that's going to collapse. We're not going to make it. And you just look at them like, so what, man? So what? But World War III is on the horizon. Nuclear Armageddon. So what? Meaning not so what to the horrible things that are taking place in this world, but the reaction that they are trying to evoke from you, your response is, so what? Because you know that if that message spreads to everyone on the planet, none of those things will have any bearing whatsoever on our collective reality and our future here. Those things wouldn't even be close to possible if everyone understood what I am referring to here. And you have to start somewhere. Some people somewhere have to start with this tone. There has to be a baseline. So if you want to continue to hate the world and everyone around you, that's fine. You can call yourself enlightened in the process if you really want to. You can do that. That's your prerogative. But I'm going to be over here where I am doing the opposite, and we'll just see what happens. We'll just see where things end up. It's like Bruce Lee said when he gave that little quote about being like water. Now, he was coming at it from a martial artist's perspective, and there are some concerns about martial arts in morphic resonance terms, meaning the morphogenetic field of martial arts. If you trace the roots of a lot of those philosophies, it's sort of that occult egregore that I was referring to earlier. That's where they really came from. But it's like Masonic lodges. You have the first 3 degrees, the Blue Lodge. Nobody in those knows anything about what's really going on. But when you get up to the higher degrees, then you find out what's really going on and what it's all about, and you have access to the information that gives you quote-unquote power. And it's the same thing in martial arts. There are many people who have come on YouTube, and yes, they're doing it from a Christian perspective, but they were former martial artists, and they really go into how the roots of it are occult sorcery. And you say occult sorcery and it sounds so bad, but I don't mean it in a bad sense. I just mean it in that power sense. Seeking this information to acquire power for yourself. And learning self-defense is completely detached, like the Blue Lodge, from the higher levels of this stuff where they're teaching you how to manipulate energy, turn your hands warm and cold on command, be out in freezing weather and make your hand fiery hot to the touch. Just manipulating your energy field in that way. And then that leads you to higher and higher levels of achieving quote-unquote power in these systems of martial arts. But you're not asking the relevant question, which is, where is the power coming from? Who or what is giving it to me? And what kind of bargain am I unknowingly making by interacting with this thought form, this morphogenetic field that is this occult sorcery. What am I agreeing to let into my life? Well, they don't tell you that at the time. It's the unspoken contract you're making. And you're so drunk on the idea of being powerful beyond what you were already given that you agree to let these entities that are in control of this world into your life in that way. And that goes back to the idea of how a lot of misery and suffering is from these entities being invited in to bloodlines, genetically speaking. Or just an individual life. It doesn't have to be some long bloodline thing. It can just be you were on YouTube one day and you watched the wrong video without knowing what you needed to know. But Bruce Lee was more coming from the martial arts self-defense angle when he was talking about be like water. And it's a really good point about how water is formless, right? You pour it into a cup. It takes the shape of the cup. You pour it into a bathtub. It takes the shape of the bathtub. And then it can crash like an ocean wave or it can recede like an ocean wave. He says, be like water in the sense of, hey, when I'm engaged in combat, that's how I am. I'm formless. I'm adjusting to the people that I am fighting. Their movements, I'm flowing with them and against them in whatever way I need to. And sometimes I recede, sometimes I crash into them in the form of a strike. But obviously that extends into how you react to things around you. Be like water, be formless. In the sense that you would say, so what? When someone's trying to tell you that the end is nigh and there is no time left. Because that is the reaction that they don't want. They need the energy extraction part of it, or else they wouldn't be doing what they do in the media. And I like to take that metaphor one step further and just imagine my mind, imagine my brain inside my head as an empty space. And there's level water there. Halfway up my skull, I just have a level of water. Like the bathtub, you have the level, or a lake. It's just a level surface, and then you have the dome above. And in the middle of that water, there's a boat. And it's inside of my brain, inside of my skull, and I got this level water, and I got a boat there. And water is incredible, right? What does it do when it is exposed to freezing temperatures? Well, it turns into a solid. And in that case, the water turns into a solid in my head, and the boat just sits there, doesn't move. And then on the flip side, when it's exposed to extreme heats, water just turns into a gas. And then the boat just falls down onto the ground at the bottom of my skull. Those are extreme variance examples in temperature, right? And what water can do. But just on a day-to-day basis, you have storms that are coming through. You have the weather of the day. And the water can get choppy. Or you can have a huge storm come through and this big wave tries to blow your boat over. And so, like the stream of consciousness, you're controlling the water in your mind to keep the boat level. No matter what you are faced with, the idea is, don't rock my boat, man, as Bob Marley said. You're keeping the water as still as possible, being formless, absorbing energy, expending energy to do whatever you need to do to counteract how the water is acting in any given moment on any given day. And in this way, you be like water. And keeping your boat level, you're never rocking anyone else's boat. That's just your primary concern. I am a humble servant of God, and my only concern is doing what I'm supposed to do. I have no interest in any kind of power over any living sentient creature in existence. that's it. That's all I got for you. That's where I'm at in my search through all of these things, and maybe it helps you, maybe it doesn't. Maybe you think I'm insane, maybe you don't. I can't control any of that. I can only control the water in my own head, metaphorically speaking. And that's all you can do too. Okay, that's it. Have a great summer, or if you're on the other side of the planet, great winter. Whatever the case may be. Later.